Keanu Reeves walked into his ex-wife's wedding, sat in the back and said nothing until he asked for the mic. What he revealed next didn't just stun the bride and groom, it changed their lives forever. He wasn't there to stop the wedding, he was there to give them something they never expected. But why now? And what did he bring? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun dipped low over the Ojai Valley, bathing the hillside venue in a golden glow. Strings of lights swayed gently above rows of white chairs, and soft acoustic music floated on the breeze. It was the kind of wedding that looked like it came out of a magazine. Everything was perfect. The flowers, the vows, the smiles. And then he arrived. Keanu Reeves stepped out of a nondescript black car and paused just outside the garden path. No one noticed him at first. He wasn't in a tux. He wore a charcoal gray suit, slightly wrinkled from the drive. No entourage, no camera crew, just Keanu walking alone, quietly slipping into the last row of the ceremony like a ghost from another life. Some guests turned their heads, a few gasped. One woman leaned over to her husband and whispered, "Is that Keanu Reeves?" The man frowned. "What's he doing here?" The bride hadn't seen him yet. Lena stood at the altar, hands clasped in front of her, radiant in lace and sunlight focused entirely on the man standing across from her. Michael, her soon-to-be husband, smiled as if nothing else existed in the world. They exchanged vows beneath a wooden arch wrapped in eucalyptus and wildflowers. The audience laughed at a few jokes, wiped tears during the readings, and erupted in cheers when the officiant declared them husband and wife. Keanu clapped along with everyone else. His hands moved, but his face stayed calm, unreadable. If he felt anything at all, joy, regret, pride, he kept it buried beneath years of practice in emotional restraint. When Lena and Michael kissed, Keanu lowered his gaze. The reception followed immediately on the same lawn. Tables had been set beneath large canopies, and a string quartet played something cheerful as champagne flowed. Keanu moved to a quieter corner of the tent away from the crowd. He declined drinks. He didn't approach the couple. He didn't speak unless spoken to, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Lena spotted him from across the tent as she was making her way toward the dance floor. Her bouquet nearly slipped from her hands. She froze for a second, just long enough for Michael to notice. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "He's here." Michael followed her eyes, and when he saw Keanu sitting alone at a corner table, his jaw tensed, but only briefly. Then he nodded and squeezed her hand. "If you want to talk to him, I'll cover for you." Lena didn't move. She simply stared at the man who once held her heart, who had vanished from her life without bitterness. Only silence. The last time they spoke was nearly 2 years ago. No phone calls, no letters, and now he was here at her wedding. Keanu glanced up and their eyes met. He stood. The room seemed to still for a heartbeat as Keanu walked slowly across the grass, hands by his sides, every movement quiet and deliberate. Conversations faded into murmurs. People turned their heads. It wasn't just that he was famous. It was the weight he carried, the story no one dared to ask about, but everyone could feel between the lines. He stopped a few feet from Lena and Michael. His voice was soft. "Congratulations." Michael extended a hand. Keanu accepted it without hesitation. The shake was firm, respectful. No tension, no contest, just two men recognizing a shared truth. They both loved the same woman. Lena's lips trembled. "Keanu, why are you here?" He hesitated. "I'll explain, but not yet." Then he turned to Michael. "May I say a few words later tonight, just for a moment, at the mic?" Michael blinked. The DJ had already cued the playlist, and the speeches were done. This wasn't the plan, but something in Keanu's eyes wasn't asking for permission. It was asking for trust. Michael nodded. Of course. Keanu thanked him and stepped away back to his quiet corner. Lena didn't follow him. She didn't know what to feel: shock, confusion, or the strange flutter in her chest that came from hearing his voice again. The evening unfolded around them. Dinner was served, laughter returned, old friends gave toasts filled with nostalgia and inside jokes. The cake was cut. The first dance made everyone cry, but still there was an unspoken tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for something. Then, just before the sun vanished behind the hills, the DJ announced, "We have a special request from one of tonight's guests. Please give a moment of your attention to Mr. Keanu Reeves." Every head turned. Keanu stood slowly adjusting the cuff of his jacket and made his way to the mic with the slow steadiness of someone walking toward a decision that had taken him years to make. The whispers grew louder as he passed, some in awe, others in disbelief. He took the microphone with both hands, looked down for a second, then raised his head. "Thank you for letting me speak," he began. "I know I don't belong here, and I didn't come to make things awkward or to bring back the past. Lena, Michael, I want you to know from the bottom of my heart I'm happy for you." Lena stared at him, eyes wide. "But that's not why I came." Keanu continued, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. "I didn't fly here to give a speech. I didn't come to be seen." He paused. You could hear the breeze through the trees. A baby somewhere giggled. But otherwise the silence was total. "I came because there's something I couldn't carry anymore." His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed white envelope. He looked at Lena. "I'm not here to win her back. I'm here to give her something she's always deserved." Keanu held the envelope carefully, like it contained something fragile. His eyes never left Lena's. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, with deliberate steps, he walked toward her through the quiet crowd. She reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. Their hands brushed. Her breath caught in her throat. "This should have come years ago," Keanu said softly. "But I wasn't ready then. I am now." Lena looked down at the envelope. Her name was written in Keanu's unmistakable handwriting, simple and elegant. No one else spoke. Even the children had gone still. She held it to her chest, then looked back up at him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What is it?" Keanu took a step back and looked toward the sky for a second, gathering his thoughts. "A truth I never shared, a promise I made, and a gift that only you can decide what to do with." Then he offered a small nod to Michael, a gesture of respect, of peace. "I wish you both happiness, and I hope this brings you closure. Or maybe something more." With that, he handed the mic back and returned to his seat in the back row. No fanfare, no drama, just the sound of waves crashing softly in the distance, and the weight of a mystery that had just shifted the entire tone of the evening. Lena stood there frozen, the envelope pressed to her chest, as if it were the most important thing she had ever held. What was inside? And why now? The crowd waited. The music stayed off, but no one could move past what they'd just witnessed. Keanu hadn't come to reclaim the past. He came to finally finish something he'd left undone. 2 hours earlier, before the vows, before the applause, and before the envelope, changed everything. The guests at Lena's wedding were still arriving in waves of laughter and perfume. Champagne glasses clinked. Soft jazz played under a canopy of oak trees. Everyone looked dressed for joy, except the man who appeared at the edge of the gravel path alone. Keanu Reeves stepped onto the property like a man walking through a memory. No one had seen his car pull up. No valet had opened his door. He simply arrived, quiet as fog, his expression unreadable. He didn't stop to admire the flowers, the view, or the elegant layout of the ceremony space. He didn't greet the greeters. He bypassed the photo booth, the signature cocktails, and the smiling ushers in matching vests. Guests who noticed him whispered with immediate curiosity. "That's Keanu Reeves," someone murmured. "Wait, what's he doing here? Is he in the groom's family?" "No. Isn't that Lena's ex-husband?" "You're kidding. I thought they hadn't spoken in years." From the back row, Keanu watched everything unfold. His face gave nothing away, but the longer he sat, the more his presence tilted the atmosphere. Some people stopped smiling. Others turned and looked back over their shoulders, wondering if this was going to turn into a scene. But Keanu never moved. He just sat quietly, hands resting on his lap, eyes forward. Meanwhile, Lena was in the bridal suite, finishing final touch-ups. Her mother was pinning the last flower into her hair when a bridesmaid rushed in, phone in hand. "You're not going to believe this," she whispered. Lena turned around, her smile starting to fade. "What is it?" The bridesmaid hesitated, then held up her phone. "Look." It was a blurry shot from one of the guests, Keanu Reeves, seated in the back row. Lena's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the edge of the makeup table to steady herself. Her voice barely came out. "He came." Lena's mother turned from the mirror, concern etched deep in her features. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" Lena nodded too quickly. "Yes, I wasn't expecting—" Her voice drifted off. One of the bridesmaids stepped forward, unsure whether to panic or stay calm. "Do you want us to ask him to leave?" Lena looked down at her hands. She still wore her engagement ring from Michael, shining and new. But the ghost of another ring, a silver band, simple and understated, flashed across her memory. Her pulse thudded. "No," she whispered. "Don't do anything." She took a deep breath, forcing herself back into the present. "It's fine. He came to... I don't know why he came, but let's not make it worse." Her mother gave her a long, uncertain look. "Are you sure?" Lena forced a small smile. "It's my wedding day, Mom. I'm not going to let the past ruin it." She stood straighter, adjusted the hem of her gown, and walked out of the suite with her head high. But inside, her thoughts spiraled. Why now? Why today? When she stepped onto the grass and saw the rows of guests before her, she tried not to scan the crowd. She told herself to focus on Michael, waiting for her under the wooden arch with that goofy, nervous grin he always wore when he was about to cry. But her eyes betrayed her. There he was, back row, still as stone. Keanu didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked at her like she was a song he once knew by heart. And for a second, just a breath, she nearly stopped walking, Michael noticed. When she reached him, he leaned close and whispered, "Is everything okay?" She nodded. Yes, but it wasn't true. Her body was here. Her soul had just collided with something unresolved. The ceremony moved forward, but the energy had changed. The vows were still spoken, the tears still shed, but a thread of tension ran just beneath the joy, like a melody played in a slightly wrong key. Lena smiled when she was supposed to. She laughed at Michael's heartfelt attempt at a joke. She said, "I do," loud and clear. But something behind her eyes remained distant. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, arm in arm, the crowd erupted in applause. Petals floated through the air, cameras clicked. But even then, Lena's gaze flicked toward the back. Keanu was already gone, or so she thought. It wasn't until the reception began, guests mingling under strings of golden lights, waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres, that she saw him again, still in the shadows. Always quiet, a glass of water in hand, no alcohol, no loud conversations, just watching. And suddenly she felt it again, the ache in her chest that had never fully gone away. It wasn't longing, it wasn't love, it was unfinished business, a door that had never properly closed. Michael was chatting with an uncle when he noticed Lena's gaze. He turned to see what she was looking at. He knew. "That's him, isn't it?" Lena nodded, her throat tight. "I didn't know he'd come. We haven't spoken in 2 years." Michael didn't flinch. "You want to talk to him?" Lena hesitated. "No, I don't know. It's your day too." He smiled softly. "It's our day, and if seeing him helps you let something go, then do it." She looked at him, overwhelmed by his kindness. Michael wasn't threatened. He wasn't jealous. He just wanted peace. For her. For them both. So she walked toward Keanu. The crowd didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, dancing, drinking. But for Lena, the space between her and Keanu felt like a canyon of years of silence, of things left unsaid. He saw her coming and stood up gently, respectfully. "Hi," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Hi." He looked older, a little more gray in the beard, a little more weariness in the eyes, but still him, still calm, still steady. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. I know. There was a pause. Why did you come? She asked, not unkindly. Keanu looked down for a second, then met her eyes. Because I never said goodbye the right way. Her breath caught. You left without a word, she said, the edge of pain still present. I know, and I've regretted it every day since. Lena glanced toward the dance floor where Michael was spinning her niece in circles, both laughing. You could have called. I wanted to, 100 times, but I thought the best way to love you was to disappear. Let you heal. Her lips parted, but no words came. And then I heard you were getting married, Keanu said. And something in me said, no more running, no more silence. She looked at him, really looked. You're not here to stop anything, are you? No, he said quietly. I'm here to give you something I should have given you a long time ago. A flicker of confusion passed over her face. What do you mean? Keanu reached into his coat, pulling out the same envelope she would later hold at the mic. But in this moment, he didn't hand it to her. He just looked at it. I'll give it to you later, he said, when it matters. Lena didn't press. She only nodded. Okay. They stood there for a moment longer. Just two people standing in the soft California dusk, somewhere between a history and a future that no longer included each other. Congratulations, Keanu said, finally, his voice full of quiet sincerity. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. Then she turned and walked back into the glow of the reception, into the arms of the man she had chosen. But she didn't walk away with anger or confusion. She walked away with something else, a strange calm that came from seeing a ghost, not as a threat, but as a man who had loved her, lost her, and come back not for himself, but for something unfinished. And in that moment, she knew. Whatever was inside that envelope wasn't just about the past. It was about finally being free from it. Before Lena ever wore white or held hands beneath strings of wedding lights, she wore cardigans in a classroom lit by sunshine and dust. Room 203 at Brook Hill Middle School had mismatched chairs, a flickering ceiling light, and a reading corner that smelled like old paperbacks. That was her world. Not glamorous, not famous, just meaningful. Every morning she stood at the whiteboard with a red marker and reminded kids why words matter. And then came Keanu. It wasn't supposed to happen. He had come to visit his godson for Career Day, a surprise appearance that made the 8th grade students lose their minds. Phones out, whispers flying, teachers peeking through doors. Lena hadn't even known who he was at first. She had grown up on poetry, not action films. When the students swarmed, she stood back with a bemused smile, arms folded. After the frenzy died down, Keanu stayed behind to thank the teachers. She offered him a paper cup of coffee from the faculty lounge. It was burnt and bitter, but he smiled like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. I'm Keanu, he said. I figured, she replied with a teasing smirk. They talked for 12 minutes, nothing earth-shattering. He asked what books her students loved. She mentioned To Kill a Mockingbird. He nodded and said it was one of his mother's favorites, too. Then he left just as quietly as he'd come. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived at the school office. Inside was a handwritten note. I'd like to keep talking if you're open to it. Coffee again. Real coffee this time. She almost didn't reply, but something about his handwriting, careful and honest, made her say yes. And just like that, two worlds, one grounded, one airborne, began to collide. Their first real date was at a quiet coffee shop, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. He wore a navy cap pulled low. She wore a denim jacket over a school sweatshirt. They sat by the window. No paparazzi, no velvet ropes, just two people talking like they had nowhere else to be. He listened more than he spoke. And when he spoke, it wasn't about Hollywood. It was about books, music, silence, grief. They discovered they both loved Thunderstorms, Leonard Cohen, and black coffee with no sugar. She confessed she sometimes cried when her students left for summer. He told her he hadn't cried in years and wondered if that meant something was wrong with him. It was real, from the start, and it moved slowly. For 6 months they dated quietly. He learned to sneak in the back of her school plays. She learned to sleep through 4 a.m. calls from set locations. They made it work until the weight of what they were carrying became too heavy. He started traveling more, shooting in Tokyo, then New Zealand, then back-to-back press tours. She tried to follow once, took unpaid leave, joined him for a month on location. But she missed the morning bell, the smell of dry erase markers, the noise of her classroom. And when she told him, he just nodded. "I know," he said, "you belong there." They talked about the future, moving in together, maybe marriage. But when the topic of children came up, everything shifted. They'd tried, quietly, hopeful. But time passed, and the pregnancy tests never changed. At first they held each other through it, whispered reassurances in the dark, but grief settled in places they couldn't reach, and soon everything felt quieter, lonelier. Neither blamed the other, but one day over breakfast, she said, "We're building a life that keeps breaking." And he replied, "I know." That was the beginning of the end. The decision to separate wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no slammed doors, no angry fights, no ultimatums. It was a quiet agreement born from two people who loved each other too much to keep hurting each other. They spent one last weekend together in Ojai, where she would one day get married. It was her idea. She said the air helped her breathe better there. He booked the same small cabin they once stumbled on during a road trip. They cooked together, listened to old records, sat under the stars. They didn't talk much about the future. They talked about what had been beautiful, what they'd carry forward. And when it came time to part ways, he helped her pack the car. She reached for his hand at the end and held it just long enough to say everything that hadn't been said. "I'll always be grateful," she told him. He gave her a small smile. "So will I." Then she drove away, and he didn't follow. In the months that followed, Lena threw herself into teaching. She started coaching the debate team, took up gardening, repainted her apartment. She surrounded herself with things she could nurture, things that didn't vanish with a film schedule or slip away in the night. Keanu disappeared from her daily thoughts, slowly, not cruelly, just naturally, as if time was erasing a name from glass. And then came Michael. He was the school's part-time facilities manager and the kind of man who fixed things without needing to be asked. Quiet, observant, warm. He'd leave a sticky note on her classroom door if a light bulb was flickering. He volunteered to build new bookshelves for her reading corner when she mentioned the old ones were tilting. They didn't fall in love all at once. It was slow, gentle, like water rising in a glass you didn't notice was empty until it was full. Michael never asked about her past, not at first. When she finally told him, he didn't flinch. "Did you love him?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. "Do you still?" She paused. "Not the way I did. Then that's enough for me." And it was. Michael gave her something she hadn't realized she was missing: presence. He was there every day, helping grade essays when she was behind, showing up with soup when she had a cold, holding her hand at parent-teacher conferences when nervous students' families showed up unannounced. He never filled the space Keanu left. He built something beside it. That was the difference. Keanu had been the dream. Michael was the life. And when Michael proposed, it wasn't at sunset or on bended knee in Paris. It was in the teacher's lounge during lunch when he opened a worn paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice, and inside was a ring nestled in the hollowed pages. She laughed and cried at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes." Their wedding was planned for the place where she'd once said goodbye. Ojai, the same rolling hills, the same still air. And just when she thought all the ghosts had been laid to rest, Keanu came back. She hadn't heard from him in over 2 years. Not a message, not a sighting, just silence. And then on her wedding day, he showed up in the last row like a question mark in human form. It didn't stir old longing, but it did stir something unfinished, something tender. She didn't love him anymore, but there was a time when she had loved no one more, and that kind of love leaves fingerprints on the soul. Michael noticed her reaction and didn't retreat. He took her hand before the ceremony and said, "You okay?" She nodded. "I think so. Still want to do this?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "I've never been more sure." That was what made Michael different. He didn't need to compete with the past he knew he could never rewrite. He only needed to be present in the life they were building now. Later, as they danced under the lights, Lena glanced toward the edge of the crowd. Keanu was still there, standing by himself, a glass of water in his hand. And she knew he wasn't there to steal anything back. He was there to give something. Something final. Something healing. The music had softened. The sky glowed with the last light of day, warm and quiet over the vineyard. Guests were scattered now, some sipping champagne by the fire pits, others lingering near the dance floor, laughter rising like a gentle hum. Lena and Michael stood side by side, arms linked, soaking in the final stretch of a day that had already given them so much. And then Keanu approached. He didn't interrupt. He waited until their conversation with another guest naturally ended. His hands were at his sides, a man at peace with discomfort. When Lena met his eyes, something flickered between them. Memory, gratitude, maybe a shared understanding that neither of them could name. "I won't stay long," Keanu said, his voice low and even. "But I wanted to give you something." He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a simple ivory envelope, sealed and unmarked, except for one word written in careful script. "Private." Lena hesitated as she took it, fingertips trembling just slightly. "What is it?" Michael asked. Keanu looked between them. "A gift for both of you. But read it alone, somewhere quiet." He nodded once, then stepped back without waiting for questions or explanations. Lena and Michael exchanged glances. He raised an eyebrow, and she gave a small, nervous laugh. A few minutes later, they slipped away to the guest cottage on the far side of the property. It was dim inside, warm and still, with only the sound of soft crickets outside the window. Lena sat down on the edge of the bed, envelope in hand. Her heart beat faster than it had all day. Michael sat beside her, his hand on hers. "Do you want to open it?" he asked gently. She nodded. Together they broke the seal. Inside the envelope were two documents. One was a handwritten letter. The other looked official, stamped, notarized, clipped together with a golden paperclip. Lena unfolded the letter first. The ink was dark, steady. Keanu's handwriting hadn't changed. "Lena, you once told me that love isn't about holding on. It's about showing up when it matters most, even if it's not convenient. I've carried those words with me for a long time. I didn't know what kind of gift would be appropriate for your wedding. Flowers seemed too small, money too impersonal. But then I heard something through someone we both trust, your friend at the adoption agency. I hope you don't mind that I reached out. I didn't ask for private details, but I did learn enough to know one thing. You've been waiting far too long for something you've always deserved." Lena's hands started to shake. Michael gently took the rest of the letter and read aloud. "So, here's what I've done. I've partnered with a private legal firm and licensed social worker to accelerate the process. Your application has already been reviewed, and pending your agreement, you've been matched with a newborn girl in Oregon." Lena gasped. Michael's breath caught. "Oh my God." He kept reading. "Her name is Sophia. She's healthy, born 10 days ago. Her biological mother made the difficult decision to place her in an open adoption. She reviewed your file. She chose you." Lena's eyes filled with tears. Her hands covered her mouth. "If you both say yes, you'll meet your daughter in less than 48 hours. The room fell silent. Michael slowly picked up the second document. It was real. There were signatures, dates, a contact for the case manager. Keanu had done everything. The logistics, the expenses, the approval. All they had to do was say yes. Lena stared at the documents as if they might dissolve in her hands. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, louder than the distant music drifting through the property. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She didn't even blink. It felt unreal, like a dream she'd had too many times to believe. Michael placed a steady hand on her back. "Lena, are you okay?" She nodded, but her breath trembled. I didn't think this would ever happen. Not after everything we went through. Not after the wait list. Not after all the delays." Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. Michael tightened his arm around her shoulders. They had spent the last year trying to adopt. The background checks, the training sessions, the interviews, the paperwork, the walls that kept appearing just when they thought they were close. A dozen moments where it felt possible, then suddenly impossible again. They had stopped talking about the nursery they wanted to build. The little clothes they once bought remained tucked away in a drawer because it hurt too much to see them. And now, out of nowhere on their wedding night, a door had opened. Lena lifted the letter again and read the last line silently. "You've always been meant to be a mother. I couldn't give you that, but maybe I can help you find the one who's been waiting for you. Love, Keanu." Her tears spilled over before she could stop them. She covered her face with both hands and let the sobs shake her shoulders. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't grief. It was the overwhelming weight of a hope that had been buried for years and suddenly rose all at once. Michael rubbed her back gently, letting her cry, feeling his own throat tighten. He had spent countless nights telling her they would be parents someday. He meant it every time. But deep down he feared the same thing she did, that it might never happen. Seeing the documents on the bed, seeing her trembling hands, seeing the reality of it written in black ink, he felt something inside him rush forward and fill the hollow places. He blinked hard. Let's look at the rest. They examined each page carefully. The case manager's name, the agency's confirmation, a plane ticket that Keanu had quietly purchased but left unused in case they wanted to choose a different date. A photograph small printed on glossy paper of a tiny newborn bundled in a soft pink blanket. Eyes closed her face, peaceful and new. Lena held the photo to her chest. "Her name is Sophia," she whispered. Michael nodded. Sophia. It felt right, as if her name had always belonged to their future. Lena's hands were still shaking when she lowered the picture. "Do you think this is really happening?" Michael exhaled slowly. "Every document is legitimate. This isn't a gesture. This isn't symbolic. This is real, Lena." She wiped her eyes. "Why would he do this? Why go to all this trouble?" Michael paused. "Maybe because he still cares about you. Not in the way of wanting you back, but in the way of wanting you to have the life you dreamed of." She looked at the letter again and nodded slowly. "He always knew how much being a mother meant to me." "And he listened," Michael said, "even after everything, even after time passed." Lena let the silence wash over them for a moment. Then she whispered, "Michael, there's a baby girl out there, right now, waiting." The words made the reality sharper, more urgent, more alive. Michael's voice softened. "If we say yes, everything changes." Lena swallowed. "Do you want this?" "Truly." He didn't hesitate. "With all my heart." She let out a breath she'd been holding for years. "Me too." Michael looked at the official document again, reading the final line aloud. "Placement available immediately." He lifted his head, eyes wide. "Lena, does this mean we could—" She finished the sentence for him. "Tonight." A stunned laugh escaped him. "Can we actually do this? Tonight?" Lena looked back at the photograph, at the tiny face that could become their daughter. Her tears returned, but her expression shifted into something steady, something brave. "Yes," she said softly. "If she's waiting, then so are we." They stood together, hands intertwined, staring at the documents spread across the bed like pieces of a miracle. Outside, the wedding continued, music, laughter, clinking glasses, but inside, that quiet cottage time felt different, slower, heavier, filled with something sacred. Lena wiped her face and took a deep breath. "We need to tell him. He deserves to know what this means." Michael nodded. "Then let's go." They gathered the papers carefully. Lena held the photo against her heart. And together, they stepped out into the soft night, ready to face the man who had given them the gift they never expected. The gift that would change their lives forever. The sky had turned a soft shade of amber as the California sun dipped low beyond the mountains. Most wedding guests had returned to the reception tent, unaware of what was unfolding just a few yards away. Lena and Michael walked hand in hand toward the small guest house near the far end of the vineyard. It was quiet, shaded by eucalyptus trees. Parked just outside was a modest black SUV. Standing beside it was a woman in a blue blouse, holding a sleeping baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. Lena stopped, her breath caught. The woman smiled gently. "Mr. Reeves said you might be coming." Michael nodded. "You're the social worker Caroline McLean. I'm with the private adoption services Keanu worked with. He arranged everything through proper channels. And yes, everything's been expedited. Your profile was already approved. It just needed a placement." She looked down at the child in her arms. "This is Grace." Lena's knees nearly gave out. The baby stirred slightly, but her little face remained calm, her eyelids fluttering beneath long lashes. "She's 3 months old," Caroline continued. "Born premature, but she's healthy now. Her birth mother was young, overwhelmed, and made the decision for adoption. Grace has been in temporary foster care since then. There have been no matches. Until now." Michael stared at the infant, then at Lena. "Grace," he repeated under his breath. Lena stepped forward slowly, unsure if she was still breathing. Caroline held the baby out with practiced care. "Would you like to hold her?" Lena's arms rose almost involuntarily. Her heart pounded as Caroline gently placed the child into them. The weight was small, so small, but the moment Grace settled against her chest, a warmth bloomed in Lena's soul like nothing she'd ever felt. She inhaled sharply and let out a sob, silent but full of years of longing. Michael's eyes filled as he watched his wife cradling the little girl. Grace nestled her cheek against Lena's collarbone, her tiny fingers curling near her mouth. One breath, then another, and then peace. "I don't know what to say," Lena whispered. "You don't have to," Caroline said. "She already knows." Behind them, a few paces away, stood Keanu. He hadn't spoken a word. He hadn't come any closer. He just stood still beneath the tree line, his hands in his pockets, watching with the faintest of smiles. His eyes, though glinting in the twilight, carried a tenderness that only someone who had known heartbreak could understand. He gave Lena a nod. She met his gaze and mouthed a quiet thank you. He didn't respond with words, only a deeper smile, and then the slightest tilt of his head like a bow. He turned, beginning to walk back toward the tent, giving them space. But just as he did, Caroline turned to Michael. "There's one more thing," she said. "The paperwork. We can finalize it right now, if you're ready." Michael took a deep breath and looked at Lena. She looked down at Grace, then back at him. Lena nodded, slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Michael reached out steady as ever and brushed one away. Then he turned to Caroline. "Let's do it." Caroline opened a leather folder she'd been carrying and spread the papers out across the small stone bench under the eucalyptus tree. The wind had settled, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves above. "These are the adoption placement forms," she explained, "and the temporary guardianship certificate effective immediately upon signing." Michael sat down, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the pen. Caroline continued, "This will allow you to bring Grace home legally. Finalization will come in a few months, but from today forward, she's yours." Michael signed, line after line. Then he handed the pen to Lena. She shifted Grace in her arms just slightly and used her free hand to sign where needed, her handwriting a little shaky but full of resolve. When it was done, Caroline flipped the last page and stamped it. "Congratulations," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "You're officially parents." Lena gasped again, this time laughing through her tears. Michael covered his mouth and turned away for a second just to breathe. It was done. A moment neither of them had dared to imagine, not after years of failed applications, closed doors, and empty holidays. Yet here it was, on their wedding day, a second beginning woven inside their first. Lena looked down at Grace, the baby's stirred eyes fluttering open just for a second. She had the deepest, softest brown eyes. Grace blinked up at Lena and let out a tiny yawn before nestling back into her chest. Michael came to Lena's side, wrapping an arm around her and gently brushing Grace's head. "I can't believe it," he whispered. "I know," she said. "She's perfect." Caroline packed up the papers, tucking everything back into the folder. "I'll take care of the agency filings. Keanu's already paid every fee. There's nothing left for you to handle tonight. Just be with her." Lena looked up, surprised again. He covered everything. Every cent, Caroline confirmed. Said it was the only wedding gift that mattered. From the distance, Keanu had paused before re-entering the reception tent. He was watching them one last glance. This time, Lena stepped forward. Still holding Grace close to her, she walked toward him slowly. Michael followed a step behind his expression, one of quiet gratitude. Keanu stood still, respectful, not expecting them to come closer. But they did. Lena stopped just a few feet from him, and in the golden hour light she said, "Would you like to meet her?" Keanu's eyebrows lifted, surprised. "You made this possible," she added softly. "You gave her to us." For a second, Keanu didn't answer. Then he nodded. "I'd be honored." Lena shifted the blanket and lowered Grace slightly, just enough for Keanu to see the sleeping infant. His eyes glistened. He didn't reach for her, didn't invade the moment, but he smiled deeper than before. "She's beautiful." Keanu's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "She looks like peace," he said. Lena smiled, her eyes full. "Her name is Grace, but we're thinking of adding a middle name." Michael stepped forward. "Hope, Grace Hope." Keanu paused. The name seemed to sit with him differently, like a wave had passed through him. "That's perfect," he said after a moment. Lena whispered, "Because that's what she is. Not just a child, not just a dream come true. She's hope." For a moment, the three of them stood there, not as past lovers or famous actors or caseworkers or newlyweds, just people, tied together by something bigger than themselves, a new life, a new beginning. Behind them, the reception music started again, distant, soft, a background hum to something far more intimate. Lena held Grace tighter. Michael reached out to shake Keanu's hand. "Thank you," he said. Keanu took his hand firmly, then looked into his eyes. "Take care of them. That's all I ask." Michael nodded, voice thick. "I will." Lena looked up at Keanu, her expression a mixture of affection and peace. "You didn't just give me a wedding gift. You gave me closure. And a future." Keanu gave a quiet smile. "You gave that to yourself." As they turned to head back toward the lights of the celebration, Lena looked down once more at Grace. The baby stirred again, her tiny fingers curling against the fabric of her wrap. She didn't know it yet, but she had arrived into a story filled with sacrifice, love, and second chances. And though the papers had just been signed in every way that mattered, she was already home. The reception tent glowed with soft golden lights as laughter and music floated through the warm California air. Guests milled about, sipping wine, nibbling hors d'oeuvres, still basking in the joy of the day. But whispers had begun to ripple through the crowd. Some had seen Lena and Michael disappear. Others had caught sight of Keanu walking quietly behind the trees. Something had shifted, and people sensed it. Then the music faded, the lights dimmed slightly, and Lena appeared. She stepped onto the small stage near the head table, still in her wedding gown. Her hair had fallen slightly from its earlier perfection, but her face radiated something different now. Not just bridal glow, something deeper, a calm joy, a fullness. In her arms, she held baby Grace. Michael stood behind her, a hand on her back, his other arm slightly out, as if steadying both of them. Lena approached the microphone. The crowd quieted. "My friends." She began, her voice shaky but bright. "Today was already the happiest day of my life. But something happened that we never expected." A few puzzled looks exchanged across the tent. She paused, kissed the top of Grace's head, and continued, "You all know how much we've wanted a family, and some of you know how long we've waited, how many closed doors, how many silent calls. Well, today during our wedding, someone opened the biggest door of all." A murmur rose, hushed and curious. She took a breath. "This," she said, holding Grace up just slightly, "as our daughter, Her name is Grace Hope, and just minutes ago, we became her parents." Gasps, a sharp inhale from one of the bridesmaids. Michael stepped beside Lena, now his voice steady and full. "And none of this would have happened without the kindness of a man many of you already know. Someone who could have walked away from our lives, but instead chose to give us this gift." Heads turned toward the back, and there stood Keanu, silent, still, watching. The crowd seemed frozen for a breathless second, then a wave of movement. People turned in unison, eyes wide as they realized who Lena was talking about. Whispers swept through the tent like wind across grass. "Keanu Reeves," someone said softly. "He gave them the baby," another whispered. Keanu didn't move. He didn't smile or wave. He just nodded once gently as if to say yes, but this isn't about me. Then the silence broke. Lena's mother clutched her chest and sobbed. Her father leaned on his cane, wiping his eyes with a trembling hand. Bridesmaids cried openly, their mascara streaking. One of the groomsmen muttered, "Did that just happen?" Lena's voice came back to the mic, soft and clear. "We had no idea this was coming, no idea he was working behind the scenes, but he found a way. He made the impossible possible." Michael stepped forward, hand still on Lena's back. This little girl was waiting for a home. And somehow today it became clear she was waiting for us. He looked directly at Keanu. "And we'll never forget what you did." The applause started slow, uncertain, one guest clapping, then another. Then the room erupted. People stood. Cheers rose like thunder. Some guests who had seemed uncertain about Keanu's presence now rushed toward him, shaking his hand, embracing him, thanking him through tears. But he kept his distance from the spotlight. When someone tried to pull him toward the mic, he gently declined. "This is their moment," he said simply. At the front of the tent, Lena rocked Grace in her arms. Her friends gathered around her, touching the baby's tiny hand, asking her name again and again. The DJ, unsure whether to resume the playlist, simply put down the mic and wiped his eyes. It was no longer just a wedding reception. It had become something else entirely. The energy in the tent transformed. Where there had been celebration, there was now awe. The kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred moments. Guests forgot their drinks and plates. They gathered close instinctively, forming a protective circle around Lena, Michael, and baby Grace. The tiny child slept undisturbed by the commotion, as if she already knew she was home. A young boy from the Flower Girls family tugged at his mom's hand and asked, "Can I meet the baby?" His mom nodded with tears in her eyes and led him forward. Grace's small fingers reflexively closed around the boy's pinky. A new wave of emotion swept the group. Lena looked up from her daughter and addressed the guests again. No mic this time, just her voice. "I didn't think I'd be able to have this moment," she said. "Not just the wedding. I mean this, holding a child in my arms, feeling like the world just gave me back something I'd quietly grieved for years." She glanced at Michael, who had crouched beside her and was brushing Grace's soft, dark curls with his hand. "I thought I had made peace with not becoming a mother," Lena continued, "but something inside me never let go. And today, right here, I get to live the dream I buried." A friend called out, "It's a miracle, Lena." She nodded slowly. "Yes." And it came from someone who knew how much it still mattered to me, even when I stopped saying it out loud. In the back, Keanu had stepped outside the tent. He stood alone, hands in his pockets, looking out over the vineyard's hills. A few reporters had arrived, tipped off by a guest's social media post. A photographer aimed a camera at him, but he raised a hand politely signaling no. This wasn't a publicity moment. It wasn't about legacy or charity. It was something quieter, deeper. A man honoring love in a way that asked for nothing in return. Inside the tent, Lena and Michael posed for photos with Grace. Her parents hugged them. The officiant, still in her robes, came forward and whispered something to Michael. He laughed, then turned to the crowd. "Well," he said, grinning, "we were planning on a honeymoon to Maui tomorrow, but I think we're heading to a baby store instead." Laughter rippled through the tent. Someone called out, That's the best honeymoon upgrade ever. Grade. A toast followed, then two, then more. Every friend seemed to want to speak. Not about Lena and Michael's romance, but about their resilience, their quiet hope, and the man who helped bring it all together. One of Lena's colleagues from the school stood up and said, "She used to stay late grading papers while listening to lullaby music in her earbuds. She once told me, 'I don't know if I'll ever be a mom, but I'll never stop thinking like one.'" The tears came again, this time joined by a kind of warmth that filled every corner of the tent. By the time the cake was cut, no one remembered the original wedding schedule. Keanu remained in the background, never returning to the mic, never stepping back into the center. But his presence lingered like a quiet chord under the music, a note of grace that held the whole moment together. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the vineyard, the world seemed to pause, with them holding its breath in reverence for the strange, beautiful gift that had just rewritten what love could look like. The vineyard had quieted down. Music still played in the distance, but most of the guests had gone back to their rooms or sat in small clusters sipping wine and talking about the miracle they had just witnessed. The night air had cooled, brushing through the cypress trees that bordered the garden path. Lanterns flickered gently, casting soft golden circles across the grass. Lena checked her phone. A new message. It was from Keanu. "Meet me in the garden, just you and Michael." She showed it to her husband. No hesitation. He nodded. They slipped away from the remaining guests and followed the path past the rose trellises, moving deeper into the quiet. The garden behind the reception area was nearly empty, just a bench near the old olive tree and the distant trickle of a small fountain. Keanu was waiting, standing beside someone they didn't recognize. A tall young man in his early 20s wearing a charcoal button-up shirt and dark jeans stood with his hands clasped awkwardly in front of him. His nervous energy was obvious. His weight shifted from one foot to the other, and his eyes darted between Keanu and the approaching couple. Keanu gave a small wave as they neared. "Hey," he said softly. "Thanks for coming out here." Lena glanced at the young man, then back to Keanu, a question already forming in her eyes. Keanu gestured to him gently. "This is Tariq," he said. "He asked to meet you tonight, and I think you should hear why." Tariq swallowed hard. He looked at Lena, then at Michael, then back at Lena. "You probably don't remember me," he began. "But I remember you. 7th grade, Cedar Valley Middle School." Lena stared at him, eyebrows drawing together. She tilted her head slowly, and something shifted in her face. Her breath caught. "Tariq." He nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, Tariq Hamilton." A wave of emotion rushed across Lena's face as the memory clicked into place. She took a slow step forward, her hand covering her heart. She remembered the quiet boy with the overstuffed backpack always sitting in the back row, the one who barely spoke, the one other teachers had written off as too far behind. "Tariq White..." She started, then stopped, blinking fast to hold back tears. "You disappeared. I thought your family moved away." "We did. Sort of," Tariq said, voice low. "We had to leave town because of my dad. But before that, you were the only teacher who ever saw me." Lena's hand trembled slightly at her side. Michael put a reassuring arm around her waist. "I didn't just see you," she said quietly. "You were special. You just needed someone to say it out loud." Tariq reached into his pocket. His hand emerged with a folded piece of paper, clearly worn from time and handling. "I wrote this when I was 16, he said, "but I never knew how to get it to you." He turned to Keanu. "But I knew how to get it to him." Keanu glanced at Tariq with a quiet nod of encouragement, then turned to Lena and Michael. "I got his letter a year ago," Keanu said. "It was sent to one of my charity foundations. I read it 3 times that night. I couldn't sleep afterward." Lena looked between the two men, her eyes filling again. "What did it say?" Tariq unfolded the letter slowly, the corners soft and creased. He didn't hand it over. Instead, he held it, gently glanced at it, then began reading. "Dear Keanu Reeves, I don't expect you to ever read this, but I needed to write it. Not because I want money or help, I just want to tell you something." Tariq paused, his voice tight with emotion. "You're famous, and I'm not. You're known all over the world, and I've spent most of my life trying not to disappear. But you helped fund a youth scholarship program that saved me. And more than that, someone once told me I mattered when I didn't believe I did." He looked up briefly, eyes meeting Lena's. Her name was Miss Carter. She was my 7th grade English teacher, and she changed everything. Lena covered her mouth. Tariq went on the letter, trembling in his hand. She gave me a notebook and told me my stories were worth writing. She said that even if I felt invisible, my words didn't have to be. I carried that sentence for years, even when my mom got sick, even when we were homeless, even when I got locked up for something stupid. He looked directly at her. "You gave me something no one else ever did, a belief that I could be more than where I came from." Lena stepped forward slowly, her lips parted, but no words coming. "I sent this to Keanu because I saw in an interview once," Tariq continued, "that he believed in helping the overlooked. I hoped he'd understand." Keanu took a breath, stepping beside him now. He didn't ask me for a job or for fame. He just wanted to say thank you. But what I read in that letter wasn't just gratitude. It was a map, a story I couldn't ignore. And it led back to you, Lena. Lena's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes, overcome. Michael stood quietly beside her, stunned. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she whispered. "I was just doing my job." "You saved a life," Keanu said, "and that's never ordinary." Tariq folded the letter carefully, tucked it back in his pocket, and said, "There's something else. That letter? It's the reason you're holding Grace tonight." Lena froze. "What?" she said. Tariq smiled, just slightly. "I'll explain," he said softly. "But you should know none of this happened by accident." The wind moved softly through the olive trees as Tariq stepped closer, his hands clasped nervously. "After I sent the letter, he said Mr. Reeves actually wrote back. At first I thought it was fake, but then he called." Keanu chuckled lightly. He asked me what kind of prank I was pulling. Tariq grinned, then turned serious. "But he didn't just thank me. He asked what I wanted to do with my life. I told him I wanted to help kids the way I'd been helped. So he gave me a chance, paid for a mentorship program, helped me find my footing." Keanu nodded. "Tariq's now in training to become a licensed social worker." Lena gasped. "That's incredible." Tariq smiled, shy but proud. "One of my assignments during training was to shadow an adoption placement. I didn't know whose name would come across my desk that day, but when I saw Lena Carter, I froze." Michael stared, stunned. "You were the social worker. I wasn't allowed to speak to you directly. But I knew. I knew it was you, and I knew I wanted to help." Lena's face crumpled. "You're the reason it all came together. I told Keanu everything Tariq said, that you and your fiancé had been on the list for years, that the agency kept skipping over you for younger couples, that there was this baby girl named Grace who kept getting bounced around, and that you'd be the perfect parents." "I couldn't believe it," Keanu added. "The letter, the timing, the baby, it all lined up. So I made a few calls, quietly, got a few approvals pushed through, paid what needed to be paid, and made sure no one knew it came from me." Lena was shaking now, her hands covering her heart. "You brought me my daughter," she whispered. "Both of you." Keanu stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "No," he said softly. "You earned her long before today. We just helped the world catch up to what you already deserved." Tears streamed down her face as she turned to Michael, who nodded, eyes glassy. "I don't even know what to say," she whispered. "You already said it," Tariq replied, "when you told me my words mattered." The sun was low now, casting long golden streaks over the garden. The mood had shifted from surprise to something deeper, something Lena couldn't yet name. She stood next to Michael and Tariq, cradling baby Grace in her arms, as Keanu reached into his blazer and pulled out a worn leather folder. He held it gently, almost reverently, and looked at Lena. "This is something I've been working on for a while," he said, "ever since I read Tariq's letter and remembered everything you did for him." He passed the folder to her. She took it cautiously, unsure of what to expect. As she opened it, her eyes scanned the first page and then froze. There, on official stationery, was a non-profit registration form. In bold, stylized lettering, the name jumped out at her. The Lena Grace Foundation supporting teachers. Empowering students, changing lives. Lena's breath caught in her throat. "I don't understand," she said softly. Keanu stepped closer, his voice gentle. "It started small," he explained. "Just one school. I called your old principal, found out what your students were missing. Supplies books, field trips that got cut because of budget slashes. I paid for them. Quietly." Lena's fingers trembled as she turned the page. There were photos, dozens of them, smiling students in classrooms, teachers holding boxes of brand new materials, handwritten thank you cards from kids with crayon-drawn hearts. "I didn't want anyone to know it was me," Keanu continued. "So I used your name, because it was your spirit behind it, your belief in those kids. You were the one who saw potential where no one else did." Michael leaned in, stunned. "How long has this been going on?" Keanu glanced at him. "Almost 2 years, since a few months after the divorce." Lena looked up, tears forming. 2 years, I didn't want it to be a grand gesture," he said. "I wanted it to be something lasting, something real." And it kept growing. More schools reached out. More teachers needed help. So I turned it into a full foundation. We've now supported 43 classrooms across the state. Lena clutched the folder to her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" Keanu smiled. "Because it wasn't about telling. It was about doing." Michael glanced at Lena, his voice thick with emotion. "This is more than we could have imagined." But Keanu wasn't finished. He nodded to Tariq, who stepped forward again, holding another envelope. Tariq handed Lena the envelope with both hands, almost like he was passing her something sacred. She looked at him curiously, then opened it. Inside was a printed overview, neatly formatted, stapled, and marked with headings. Programs, budgets, partnerships, impact reports. It looked like the blueprint of an entire organization. "What is all this?" Lena whispered. Keanu answered softly. "The future of the foundation, if you want it." Lena skimmed the pages and felt her knees weaken. "Teacher Grants Initiative," she read aloud. "Mentorship Network, Emergency Classroom Fund, Literacy Pipeline, Statewide Educator Conference." She looked up. "Keanu, this is massive. It needs someone who understands schools," he said. "Someone who knows what teachers face. Someone who's lived it." Tariq nodded beside him. "Miss Lena, the way you taught us. You changed lives. You changed my life. The foundation is already helping so many kids, but with you guiding it, it could help thousands more." Her eyes filled again. "But I'm just one teacher." "No," Keanu said. "You're the teacher who stayed after school every day. The teacher who bought books with her own salary. The teacher who wrote recommendation letters for students who no one believed in." He paused. "You're the heart of this, Lena. You always were." Michael stepped closer, wrapping one arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said gently. "But we know you were meant for something like this." Lena took a shaky breath. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Keanu smiled with a gentleness that held years of unspoken gratitude. "Run it with me, part-time. You'd stay in the classroom, but you'd lead the programs, the vision, the direction. The teachers trust you more than they'd ever trust someone like me. They'll listen to you." He hesitated for a moment. "You don't owe me anything, but you've earned this chance more than anyone I've ever met." She stared down at the folder again, overwhelmed. "Why did you name it after me?" "Because it started with you," Keanu said, "and with Grace." His eyes softened as he looked at the baby asleep in Michael's arms. "She's the reason you kept going even when things were falling apart. She's the hope you always carried, even in silence." Lena wiped her cheeks. "But won't it be strange? Us working together again?" "Strange," Keanu repeated thoughtfully. "Maybe, but sometimes strange things lead to good things. And I promise you this isn't about us. It's about kids like Tariq. Kids who just need someone to show up." Michael nodded. "And we'll support you, whatever you choose." The garden was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet where emotions settle and clarity begins to form. Lena stared at the foundation summary, her fingers gently tracing her name, printed across the top. She thought of her students, of the schools she visited, of the classrooms she had always wished she could do more for, and of the baby sleeping in Michael's arms, the child she already loved more than her own heartbeat. Finally, she looked up, eyes steady, now voice still trembling but certain. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said, "but I want to be part of this. I want to help the kids who fall through the cracks. I want to do more." Keanu exhaled slowly, relief and gratitude filling his expression. "Then we'll build it together," he said, "one school at a time." Lena nodded, clutching the folder close. She didn't know it yet, but today wasn't just her wedding day. It was the day her life's purpose grew bigger than she ever imagined. The soft launch of the Lena Grace Foundation took place 3 weeks after the wedding. It was held inside a renovated community center in Pasadena, a modest building with warm lighting, fresh paint, and a small stage decorated with flowers. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. Exactly the kind of space Lena had always loved, the kind where real work happened. Lena, Michael, and baby Grace arrived quietly. The board members were already inside, so were teachers from Sunrise Middle School friends and a few donors. There was a hum in the air, a steady sense of anticipation, but Lena had no idea what Keanu and the team had planned. She walked inside holding Grace against her shoulder, her other hand wrapped in Michael's. She expected a simple meeting, maybe a speech, maybe a thank you. What she didn't expect was to see nearly 100 people filling the room. Teachers, former students, counselors, volunteers, community leaders. They turned toward her as if she were walking onto a stage she didn't realize she'd been standing on for years. Keanu wanted everyone who mattered to be here, one board member whispered as she passed. "Because you're the reason this foundation exists." Lena felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to being the center of anything. She had lived her entire career trying to make her students visible, not herself. Keanu stepped onto the small stage, wearing a simple charcoal suit. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't command attention with dramatic gestures. He didn't need to. When Keanu Reeves stood silently and waited, the room settled all at once. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "Today isn't about launching a foundation. It's about honoring the person whose work inspired it." He looked at Lena the same way he had looked at her on the day she handed him divorce papers, with quiet respect, with the softness of someone who understood what it meant to care deeply, even when life changed direction. "There are teachers," Keanu continued, "and then there are teachers who alter the entire path of a child's life. Teachers who stay after school, teachers who listen, teachers who make you believe you're capable even when the world says you're not. Lena Hartford is one of those teachers. These walls exist because of her, and so does what you're about to see." He stepped aside. A curtain behind him slid open to reveal a wooden plaque mounted on the wall. Light shone down from a pendant lamp above it. The metal plate in the center was brushed gold, engraved with words Lena recognized immediately. It was her teaching philosophy, a sentence she had written during her first year in the classroom, back when she was 24 and full of hope. "Every child can learn," the plaque read. "Every child deserves a champion. Every child deserves to feel seen." Lena covered her mouth, tears already running warm down her cheeks. Michael tightened his arm around her. Grace stirred against her chest, but Keanu wasn't finished. He stepped forward again. "And now," he said, "I'd like to introduce the real proof of her legacy." He motioned toward the side door. The room grew quiet. One by one, they began to walk in. Lena froze. Former students, students she had taught over a span of 15 years, students she hadn't seen in more than a decade. They came in quietly, heads high, holding something in their hands. Photographs. Not of themselves, but of who they had become. The first former student to step forward was a tall young man with broad shoulders and a calm, serious expression. Lena remembered him instantly. Marcus, the boy who used to fall asleep in class because he stayed up all night helping his grandmother. The boy who struggled through reading but never gave up. Now he wore a crisp navy uniform and carried a photo of himself standing beside a juvenile justice center. "I run a prison reform program," he said, speaking to the audience, but looking directly at Lena. "Because you were the first person to tell me I wasn't a lost cause." Lena's breath hitched. She remembered the day he cried in her classroom, terrified his future would look like his father's. She had held his hand and told him it didn't have to. Next came Maya, once a shy girl who barely raised her voice above a whisper. She stepped onto the stage in a blazer with a badge clipped to her pocket. She held a picture of herself in front of a tech office filled with engineers. "I'm a software developer now," she said, "because you told me stories matter. You said code is just another kind of story." Her voice cracked. "You gave me the confidence to write mine." A third student approached, a young woman with paint-stained fingers and a bright scarf. Her name was Jasmine. She carried a large photograph showing a gallery, opening lights shining on her artwork. "You told me my art wasn't just doodling," she said. "You told me to chase beauty even when life felt ugly." She smiled through tears. "I'm an artist today because of you." Then Tariq stepped forward again, holding a laminated picture of himself, giving a speech on a stage. "Youth advocate," the caption read. "You saved me," he said simply. "Everyone here might have their own stories, but that's mine. You saved me." One by one, students stepped onto the stage. A nurse, a firefighter, a social worker, a chef who ran a program feeding homeless teens, a college professor. A man who became a father at 19, but credited Lena for helping him graduate so he could support his daughter. Another who ran a robotics club for kids who couldn't afford extracurriculars. 20 of them lined the stage shoulder to shoulder, each holding a photograph that represented the life they had built, the life they might never have reached without someone who believed in them before they believed in themselves. Lena clutched Grace against her chest, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Every face, every story, every moment she once thought was small, every after-school tutoring session, every notebook she bought with her own money, every encouraging word she offered on days when she doubted she had anything left to give. This was the harvest of those years. This was her legacy made visible. The room stayed quiet, waiting for her to speak. Lena stepped forward, tears still falling, holding her daughter close. She looked at her former students, at the grown adults they had become, and finally whispered, "You were the reason I never gave up." The weeks following the Foundation's soft launch felt like stepping into a new rhythm of life, one Lena had never imagined, but somehow fit her perfectly. She woke each morning to the soft sounds of Grace, babbling in her crib, sunlight spilling across the floor of the nursery. Michael would already be in the kitchen, preparing coffee, humming in that quiet way he did when he was content. Their home, once filled with two adults moving through life, side by side, now felt fuller, warmer, alive. Lena eased into motherhood with a mixture of tenderness and awe. There were still moments she looked at Grace and felt her heart squeeze with disbelief that the tiny girl in her arms was really hers. After years of wanting, waiting, and grieving, she finally had the chance to give her love to someone who needed it as much as she needed them. Grace was steadying her, anchoring her, reminding her that life could bloom even after heartbreak. Her first day back at Sunrise Middle School was quieter than she expected. She walked into her classroom with Grace's photo tucked into her planner. Students rushed toward her, excited and loud, offering congratulations and demanding to know every detail about the baby. Some of them had seen the viral clips from the wedding announcement. Others had heard from teachers. They all wanted to meet Grace someday. Lena promised they would. Teaching felt different now, though not in a way that made her feel distanced from the work. It felt deeper, more purposeful. Every child she looked at reminded her of Grace's future, and she wanted the world to be kinder, more hopeful, more supportive for all of them. 3 afternoons a week after her final class ended, she walked to her car and drove to the small Foundation office. It sat above a cafe with creaky wooden stairs and too few windows, but it felt right, humble, familiar. It reminded her of the school buildings she'd worked in for years, where great things happened in imperfect spaces. The staff greeted her warmly every time she walked in. A program director, 2 part-time assistants, and a volunteer coordinator. Keanu had insisted she choose the team herself, and she selected people who understood education not from spreadsheets or theories, but from experience. Teachers, counselors, community organizers. She started small, reviewing grant applications, reading teacher requests, approving literacy kits for classrooms that needed them. Even the most basic supplies, pencils, notebooks, whiteboards, felt like small miracles when she remembered how often she had bought them herself. Michael supported her every step of the way. He rearranged his schedule at the hospital so he could be home early on her foundation days. He cooked dinner while Lena fed Grace. He rocked the baby while she finished her notes or read through proposals. Their shared routines built a structure that held them steady in the joyful chaos of new roles. And in the background, like a quiet, steady breeze, was Keanu. He checked in once every week or two, never pushing, always respectful. A text asking how the literacy program rollout was going. A brief call to discuss donations. An email forwarding a school district contact who might need help. He kept his distance, but he never disappeared. Lena appreciated that more than she ever said aloud, because boundaries mattered, respect mattered, and he honored both flawlessly. One evening in early autumn, Lena sat at the dining table sorting through a stack of grant proposals. Grace was asleep in her bassinet nearby, and Michael was washing dishes in the kitchen. The home was quiet, except for the soft clink of plates and the rustle of papers. It was the kind of ordinary moment Lena once feared she might never have. A home, a family, a purpose that stretched beyond the walls of her classroom. A notification lit up her phone, a text from Keanu. Board approved the Classroom Libraries Initiative. 20 schools, full funding. Congratulations. Lena smiled softly and typed back, "That's incredible. Thank you for pushing it forward." His reply was simple. "It was your idea. I just lifted the heavy parts." There was comfort in their dynamic now, a gentle distance, an unspoken understanding that their connection had changed shape, but not worth. They were partners in purpose, not partners in life. And that was enough. After finishing the proposals, Lena walked to the window. The streetlight cast a warm glow over the quiet neighborhood. She thought about how different this life was from the one she'd lived during her marriage to Keanu. Back then, most evenings were spent alone waiting for him to return from a set in some faraway country. She had loved him deeply, but the life they had built was always stretched thin by distance timing and the weight of things they rarely spoke about. Now everything felt grounded, present, whole. The next morning, Lena brought Grace to the foundation office for the first time. Staff members gathered around, cooing and marveling at the tiny baby who had already become part of the foundation's name and story. Grace smiled, reaching out for fingers and lanyards and name badges. It felt right to have her there, in the heart of the work that was shaping thousands of futures. "Maybe she'll run this place someday," one of the assistants joked. Lena laughed. "Only if she loves teachers as much as I do." Days passed with a comfortable rhythm. She taught reading strategies to 7th graders. She approved grants for rural schools. She rocked Grace during nap time. She attended board meetings where Keanu sometimes appeared remotely, quietly listening with the same steady calm he'd always carried. He offered insights. He asked questions. But he never overshadowed her, never tried to lead the room. He let Lena take the front, guiding the vision with confidence she didn't realize she'd grown into. One night, while feeding Grace in the rocking chair, Lena thought about everything that had changed since her wedding day. She had gained not just a child, not just a husband, not just a new role. She had gained a fuller understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. The teacher who once wondered if her work mattered now saw its reach stretching across cities, schools, and families she might never meet. Her life was blossoming in ways she never expected, and she was finally living every part of it. The call came on a quiet Thursday morning while Lena was packing Grace's diaper bag before school. The sun was just beginning to warm the kitchen windows, and Michael was pouring cereal into 2 bowls, one for himself, one for Lena, though he knew she would probably forget to eat again. Grace babbled happily in her high chair, smacking the table with tiny hands. Lena's phone buzzed. She saw the name on the screen and froze for half a second. Keanu. She answered, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder while fastening Grace's tiny shoes. His voice came through steady and warm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency she recognized immediately. Lena, I have news. Big news. She paused. Okay. Should I sit down for this? Probably, he said. 5 more cities want to replicate what we built here. She straightened in surprise. 5? You're serious. Very serious. Denver, San Antonio, Minneapolis, Baltimore, and St. Louis. A small exhale came through the line, the kind he made when trying not to overwhelm someone. They've seen the early results from the literacy programs and the mentorship pilot. They want in, and honestly, they need it. Lena sank into a chair, heart thumping. 5 cities. 5 schools in each city. Maybe more. This was no longer a local project. It was becoming something national, something enormous, something with reach far beyond anything she ever imagined. Keanu continued, They're asking for your guidance. They want you to help design the programs from the ground up, to meet with teachers, visit classrooms, see the conditions firsthand. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, staring at Grace's gummy smile. Keanu, that's huge. But I don't know if I can just leave. I have my students. Grace is still so little. And traveling between cities, I don't know how that works. I know it's a lot, he said gently. And I'm not asking for an answer right now. I just want you to think about it. Your perspective is the reason this works. Teachers trust teachers, not executives. They need you. She didn't speak for several seconds. Her mind was already racing through logistics and fears she didn't want to name. Can I talk to Michael about it first? Of course, he said. Take your time. I'll send the proposal documents when we hang up. When she ended the call, Lena didn't move. Her fingers remained lightly pressed around the phone as if her body hadn't quite caught up with the weight of the conversation. Michael turned from the counter and immediately sensed something was different. What happened? He asked. She inhaled slowly. 5 more cities want to partner with the foundation. Michael blinked. 5? As in 5 entire cities. She nodded. They want me to help design the programs and visit some of the schools. Michael's face didn't show fear or tension or hesitation. Instead, his expression softened into something warm and steady. That's incredible, Lena. Incredible, she echoed, though her voice carried more uncertainty than excitement. Are you scared? He asked quietly. She nodded again, almost imperceptibly. Yes, very. Michael pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, giving her space to breathe. Grace let out a delighted squeal at the sound of her parents' voices, completely unaware of the magnitude of the moment unfolding around her. Lena, he said gently, you don't have to say yes immediately, but tell me what's scaring you the most. She rubbed her palms together, thinking. Traveling with a baby, leaving my students for days at a time, being responsible for something this big. What if I mess it up? What if they expect too much from me? Michael leaned forward, his voice soft. What if they expect exactly what you've always done? Show up. Listen. Help teachers who need support. You've done that your whole life. She looked down at Grace, who was now trying to fit a spoon into her mouth upside down. I don't want her life to feel chaotic. I don't want her to grow up in airports. Michael smiled. She's 3 months old. Right now, she doesn't care where she is as long as she's with us. And if it ever becomes too much, we adjust. We're a team. Remember? Lena took a deep breath. You'd really travel with me. To all those cities? In a heartbeat, he said, My schedule is flexible for the next year. I can take rotating shifts at the hospital. And if we plan it right, we can make these trips meaningful. Family adventures, not work burdens. His confidence steadied her. It always had. Lena opened the email Keanu had sent. Inside were photos from each city, aging school buildings, overcrowded classrooms, hallways with peeling paint, teachers smiling despite limited resources, children holding tattered books, principals asking for help not to compete, but to survive. The images stirred something in her chest, a familiar ache, the same ache that had driven her for years. Michael watched her face soften as she scrolled. "You want to do it," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pictured walking into those classrooms, meeting teachers exhausted from fighting alone, watching students light up at the chance of something better. She pictured Grace one day learning about this chapter of their lives and understanding that her parents moved not out of ambition, but compassion. "I do want to," Lena whispered. "I really do." "Then we'll make it work," Michael said. "All three of us." That evening after Grace fell asleep, Lena stepped out onto their small porch and called Keanu back. She could hear the familiar stillness in the way he answered, as if he had been waiting without wanting to pressure her. "Keanu," she said, "we talked about it." And his voice was cautious, patient. "I'm in," Lena said, "but only if we travel as a family, and only if the program gives teachers a real voice, not just a top-down design." Keanu exhaled a subtle release of relief and gratitude. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Welcome to the next chapter." Lena looked through the window at Michael rocking Grace to sleep, their silhouettes warm and steady. A new chapter indeed, for all of them. Lena's first trip as part of the national initiative began in early spring. Their small family boarded a flight to Denver. Grace, tucked securely in a wrap against Lena's chest. Michael carried the bags, humming softly to calm the baby when she fussed. The moment felt surreal. A year ago, Lena was a full-time teacher balancing lesson plans and parent emails. Now she was stepping into airports, not for vacations, but to rebuild school systems. When they landed, the air was crisp and cool. Snow still clung to the edges of rooftops, but the sky was a startling blue. A district representative greeted them warmly and guided them to a waiting van. As they drove through the city toward the first school, Lena pressed her forehead lightly against the window, taking in the scenery. She felt the pulse of something larger than herself, something powerful taking shape. The first school they visited sat on the outskirts of the city. The building was old, the bricks faded, the windows unevenly tinted. But inside the hallways buzzed with students who gave shy waves or whispered excitedly when they recognized her from the Foundation's online videos. Teachers greeted her with a mixture of hope and exhaustion, the kind that lived behind the eyes of people doing too much with too little. The principal, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and tired shoulders, led Lena through the building. They stopped at classrooms where the carpet was worn thin and bookshelves sagged from age. Lena listened carefully as teachers explained the challenges they faced: outdated materials, overcrowded rooms, limited support staff, and a growing number of students with needs they didn't have the resources to meet. She nodded, asked questions, took notes, and listened more than she spoke. She had learned long ago that teachers didn't need saviors. They needed allies. Partners. People who understood that change came from collaboration, not commands. Meanwhile, Grace slept peacefully in her carrier on Michael's chest, blissfully oblivious to the gravity of the moment. Teachers smiled at the sight of her, their expressions softening. Children peeked through classroom doors to wave at the baby, giggling when she fluttered her eyes open. During their second day in Denver, Lena held a workshop for local educators. She shared strategies she had used in her own classroom, demonstrated literacy tools, and listened to stories that mirrored her own experiences. Teachers lined up afterward to speak with her individually. Some cried quietly, admitting they felt seen for the first time in years. Others asked for advice. A few simply hugged her and thanked her for showing up. The foundation committed funding to 3 critical areas: building repairs, updated learning materials, and a mentorship network connecting struggling teachers with those who had developed strong systems of support. Lena worked late into the night, drafting recommendations and reviewing the budget allocations. Michael sat beside her on the hotel bed, rocking Grace gently as she drifted to sleep. The quiet partnership between them grounded her, making the work feel sustainable rather than overwhelming. When they boarded the flight home, Lena glanced around the cabin. Parents traveling with children, teachers returning from conferences, exhausted workers heading home after long trips. She felt connected to them in a way she couldn't quite name. All of them trying, all of them pushing through life's heaviness, all of them hoping for a better tomorrow. Denver was only the first stop. 4 cities still waited, and her impact was only beginning. Their next destination was San Antonio. The heat wrapped around them as soon as they stepped off the plane, a warm, dense blanket that made Grace squirm in her stroller. The school district had arranged a small welcome gathering, modest but sincere. Banners painted by students hung in the hallway, reading "Thank you, teachers," and "Welcome, Lena and family." The gestures touched her deeply. The first school they visited was housed in a building nearly a century old. The walls held layers of history, but they also held cracks, peeling paint, and classrooms in need of repair. Teachers guided Lena through the campus with a mix of pride and apprehension. They wanted her to see the magic happening inside their rooms, but they also worried about showing her how much they desperately needed. Lena spent hours observing lessons and speaking to students. She listened to a 5th grader explain how much he loved reading, but couldn't take books home because the library didn't allow checkouts due to limited copies. She heard a teacher whisper that she used her own money to buy markers, snacks, and paper. Another teacher admitted she stayed after school every day because some of her students had nowhere else safe to go. These moments stayed with Lena as she met with administrators later that day. She pushed for immediate funding to update the library, expand mental health services, and launch after-school support programs. The district agreed, hopeful and grateful. From San Antonio, the family traveled to Minneapolis, where bitter cold winds whipped across the parking lot as they arrived at the 3rd school. Inside, however, Lena found the warmest group of teachers she had met so far. They were creative, resourceful, and determined to turn their underfunded classrooms into places of refuge. Students proudly displayed projects made from recycled materials. Teachers showed Lena their homemade reading corners built from donated furniture. She took notes, snapped photos, and promised help was coming. Baltimore was next. The city carried a fierce resilience she admired instantly. Schools were overcrowded, but the staff radiated energy and defiance. Lena held meetings until her voice grew hoarse, learning everything she could about the unique challenges their communities faced. She met high schoolers who dreamed of engineering careers, 3rd graders who loved poetry, and teachers who spent every ounce of themselves making those dreams possible. Their final stop was St. Louis, where a small elementary school captured her heart. The principal gave her a tour, while children rushed up to greet Grace with gentle curiosity. Lena knelt beside them, answering questions about the baby and learning their names. At every school, she saw the same thread: hope, trying to survive under impossible conditions. And everywhere she went, people told her the same thing: "You make us believe change is possible." 2 years passed in a blur of airports, classrooms, late-night planning sessions, and thousands of children whose faces Lena would never forget. Grace was a toddler, now full of energy and curiosity, tugging at Lena's hand whenever they walked school hallways. Michael had become an expert at turning hotel rooms into temporary homes, setting up bedtime routines no matter where they were on the map. And the Lena Grace Foundation had grown far beyond anything any of them imagined. Its programs were active in dozens of districts. Test scores rose, teacher retention improved, student mentorship networks flourished. Communities that had once felt forgotten were beginning to breathe again. Then the call came. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Lena had just put Grace to bed and was rinsing paint from her fingers after helping her daughter create a messy, joyful finger-painting masterpiece. Michael was making tea in the kitchen. Her phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID displayed a number she didn't recognize. She answered with mild curiosity, drying her hands on a towel. A warm, authoritative voice greeted her. "Mrs. Hartford, this is the office of the Secretary of Education. We're calling on behalf of the White House." Lena froze. For a moment, she wondered if she'd misheard. The president would like to invite you to speak at an education ceremony next month, the voice continued. A new national reform bill is being signed, and much of its structure is based on the Lena Grace model. We would be honored if you would stand beside the secretary during the signing. Lena's breath caught in her chest. The national model, she whispered. You're sure you have the right person? We're absolutely sure, the caller said with a smile in their voice. Your work has changed the way this country views education support. The president wants to recognize that. Lena leaned her free hand against the counter to steady herself. This wasn't just growth. This wasn't just momentum. This was a shift, one that shaped policy, not just classrooms. I don't know what to say, she admitted softly. Say you'll come, the caller said. The invitation is official. After arranging travel details and expressing her gratitude at least 5 times, Lena hung up the phone and simply stood there, staring at the floor, processing. Michael walked over with 2 mugs of tea and immediately noticed her expression. What happened? He asked, concerned. Lena looked up at him, overwhelmed. The White House called. Michael set the mugs down, slowly. The White House. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. They want me to speak. The new national bill is based on the Foundation's programs. They're naming it after Grace. Michael's hands flew to his mouth before he pulled her into a tight embrace. Lena, that's monumental. She clung to him, still stunned, still trying to absorb the enormity of the moment. Their small, humble work, their quiet effort, their nights spent drafting plans in hotel rooms, their conversations with exhausted teachers. It had reached the nation's highest office. When Lena finally stepped back, a single thought crossed her mind. She needed to tell Keanu. Lena called Keanu the next morning. It was early, barely sunrise, the sky painted with soft pink light. She wasn't even sure he would be awake, but he answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, the way it always was when he sensed something important was coming. Lena, everything okay? She took a breath. I got a call last night, from the White House. There was a pause on the other end. Not surprise exactly, more like quiet recognition, as if he had been waiting for this moment long before she realized it was possible. What did they say? He asked softly. They invited me to speak, she said. The new national education bill is based on the Foundation's model. They want me there when it's signed. They're naming it after Grace. Another pause, then a long, steady exhale. Lena, that's extraordinary. She felt her eyes sting. I don't even know how this happened. I don't know how something that started in a tiny office above a cafe turned into this. I do, he said gently. It happened because you showed up, in every city, in every school, for every teacher. You carried this with more heart than anyone else ever could. She swallowed hard, touched by the sincerity in his voice. Will you come? She asked. I mean, you don't have to stand beside anyone, but it would mean something if you were there. I'll be there, he said without hesitation. I wouldn't miss it. The next month passed in a flurry of preparation meetings and security clearances. Michael helped her pick out a simple navy dress, the kind that felt professional, but still allowed her to breathe. Grace toddled around the living room while Lena practiced her speech, occasionally babbling as if offering her own commentary. On the morning of the ceremony, the White House lawn buzzed with movement. Flags rippled in the breeze. Rows of chairs stretched across the grass. Cameras were already set up, reporters adjusting microphones and checking notes. Lena stepped onto the grounds, holding Grace's hand, while Michael walked beside them with proud, steady steps. She had never seen anything like it. Secret Service agents moved in organized patterns. Staff members hurried between tents. The air felt charged, as if the entire place hummed with history. A coordinator led them to the front row. Lena's name was listed beside officials she had only ever seen on television. The Secretary of Education greeted her warmly, shaking her hand with genuine respect. You changed the national conversation, he told her. Today is as much your day as it is ours. Lena felt her breath catch again. She was hearing that more often now, and it still didn't feel real. As she took her seat, she spotted him. Keanu stood near the back, hands in his pockets, wearing a charcoal suit and a quiet, almost shy expression. He gave her a small nod, a silent message. "I'm here. You're not alone." The president stepped up to the podium. Cameras clicked. The crowd hushed. The ceremony began. And Lena Hartford, the teacher who once wondered if her work mattered, prepared to stand beside the Secretary of Education as a national bill built on the foundation she helped create became law. The ceremony spilled into the afternoon, leaving the White House lawn glowing in soft sunlight. Guests mingled under canopies. Reporters gathered quotes from educators and community leaders. Children from several pilot schools rushed around, excitedly waving pamphlets like flags. Michael carried Grace on his hip as she reached for anything colorful in sight. Lena shook hands, accepted congratulations, and took photos with teachers who had traveled across the country to witness the moment. But every so often, her eyes drifted to the back corner of the lawn, where Keanu stood quietly near the garden path. He didn't try to join the crowds or step into the spotlight. He didn't move toward her or call for her attention. He just waited, hands tucked in his pockets, watching the joy around him with a gentle, distant smile. Hours passed before she finally slipped away, walking the stone path toward the garden. The noise of the ceremony faded behind her, replaced by the soft rustle of flowers and the sound of wind brushing through the leaves. Keanu sat on a weathered bench under an arch of climbing roses, elbows resting on his knees, head lowered in thought. She approached slowly. "You disappeared?" she said, her voice light but warm. He glanced up, then offered the faintest smile. "You had an entire country to greet. I didn't want to crowd the moment." "You were part of that moment," Lena said, taking a seat beside him. "None of this would exist without you." He looked out toward the garden, the sunlight casting soft shadows across his face. "That's not true. I just opened a few doors. You walked through them and built everything on the other side." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt quiet and heavy, but not uncomfortable, just full. 2 years of work travel impact and personal growth sat between them like an invisible thread, pulling memories into the silence. Lena folded her hands in her lap. "You were there at the beginning," she said, softly. "At the wedding, at the first foundation meeting. At every turning point. I never got a chance to thank you properly." "You don't owe me thanks," he said gently. "You took something I helped start and turned it into a national movement. You gave it the soul it needed. You and Michael and Grace. This is your mission now." A soft ache settled in her chest. She heard something final in his tone. Not cold, not distant, just accepting. "Your mission," he repeated quietly. "Not mine anymore." She searched his face. "What are you saying?" He exhaled a long, steady breath. "I think it's time for me to step back. The work is bigger than anything I ever imagined, and it's grown into something that doesn't need me to steer it. If I stay too involved, I might get in the way of what it's meant to become." Lena felt her throat tighten. "Keanu, you've been part of this from the beginning. Why stop now?" He turned toward her with a look that held pride, affection, and something bittersweet. "Because you don't need me anymore. And that's the clearest sign that I did my part." Before she could respond, he reached into his coat and pulled out a slim, cream-colored envelope. "For you," he said. Lena stared at the envelope resting in his hand. It was simple, unmarked, almost too ordinary for the weight she felt pressing against her ribs. She hesitated before taking it. Something in the way he held it told her this moment mattered more than anything that had come before. "What is this?" she asked quietly. "A closing chapter," he said, "and a beginning for you." Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid a thumb under the flap. Inside was a single folded document, neatly printed with a small handwritten note clipped to the top. She opened the note first. For the next 10 years it read, "So no child waits and no teacher fights alone." Her breath caught. She lifted the document, and her world tilted. "Keanu," she whispered. It was a donation agreement, a pledge so large it didn't feel real at first glance. enough funding to fully support 1,000 schools. Not just supplies, not just books, full support, libraries, repairs, counseling programs, technology, teacher grants, after-school services, 1,000 schools, 10 years. Her voice shook. This is impossible. He shook his head. It's done. Already arranged with the Foundation's board and legal team. They'll handle everything. You don't need to stress over logistics. She looked up at him, stunned. Why would you do this? He smiled softly. Because it was never about one city or 5 cities. It was about what you sparked. I've watched teachers cry because someone finally listened. I've watched kids light up because someone finally believed in them. I've watched you carry this mission with every part of who you are. He paused, his eyes gentle. This gives you room to grow it without limits, room to dream bigger than budgets and approval forms. Lena swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. This could change everything. It will, he said simply. She looked down at the document again, the numbers swimming through tears she refused to blink away. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, he said. You turned pain into purpose. You built something beautiful out of something broken. You made Grace's name mean hope for kids you'll never meet. That's all the thanks I need. Silence drifted between them, warm and heavy. Finally, Lena asked Will, We still see you? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, as friends, as people who care about the same world, but the day-to-day work that belongs to you and your family now. The Foundation needs your voice more than it ever needed mine. She wanted to argue. She wanted to insist that he still mattered, but looking at him now, peaceful, resolved, proud, she realized this wasn't an ending he feared. It was one he chose. He stood from the bench, slipping his hands back into his pockets. Take care of them, he said softly, glancing toward the crowd, where Michael held Grace in his arms. I will, she whispered. He nodded once. Then he turned toward the garden path, sunlight catching his silhouette as he walked away. The flight home after the White House ceremony felt different from every trip before it. Lena sat by the window, Grace curled against her shoulder, breathing softly in that peaceful way toddlers do when the world has worn them out. Michael slept lightly beside them, his arm brushing hers, still warm from the long day. Outside, clouds drifted slowly past glowing orange in the evening sun. For the first time in months, Lena allowed herself to rest. Not physically, she was still sitting upright, still holding Grace securely, but emotionally. The whirlwind of speeches, handshakes, decisions, and expectations finally softened into something gentle, something human. When they landed and finally walked into their own home, it felt like stepping into a familiar embrace. The scent of lavender from the diffuser, the small pile of toys near the couch, the half-finished puzzle on the dining table. All of it reminded her that life in its truest form was not lived in front of cameras or on political stages. It happened here, in these quiet rooms, in the place where burnt toast and mismatched socks lived alongside big dreams. The next morning began exactly the way every morning should. Grace toddled into their room at sunrise, clutching her stuffed bunny and announcing her presence with a cheerful sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a squeal. Michael rolled over and groaned playfully. Lena scooped their daughter into the bed, and the three of them lay there, tangled in blankets, letting the day begin slowly. Later in the kitchen, breakfast became a delightful disaster. Michael attempted pancakes. Lena reached for her coffee, but accidentally knocked over the milk carton. Grace clapped as if the spill were a performance meant just for her. They cleaned it up, laughing, the sound filling the house with something more valuable than perfection ever could. After breakfast, Lena sat at the dining table with her laptop open. The Foundation team had sent her updates early, planning for the next round of school renovations, reports from pilot cities, letters from teachers expressing excitement about the expanded funding. Grace wandered around the room, humming sometimes, climbing into Lena's lap to press random keys on the keyboard. Instead of feeling interrupted, Lena felt grounded. These moments reminded her why she had taken the path she did. By afternoon, she stepped outside with Grace to check the small garden behind their house. Tomatoes ripened on the vines, sunflowers nodded gently in the wind. Grace plucked a dandelion and held it up to her mother with delight. Lena knelt, brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead, and thought about how small moments like this steadied her just as much as the big ones lifted her. As she watched Grace chase a butterfly, she felt the truth settle deep in her chest. Her life hadn't become extraordinary because she changed the world. It had become extraordinary because she chose to build a life that mattered both to her family and to thousands of strangers whose paths she might never cross. The work she did, the love she gave, the ordinary days she lived with purpose. That was what gave everything meaning. The rest of the week settled into an easy rhythm, the kind of normalcy Lena once feared she might never find again. She taught her classes in the mornings, slipping back into the familiar rhythm of guiding students through stories and essays. When she walked into her classroom that Monday, her 7th graders surprised her with a makeshift banner that read, "Congratulations, Mrs. Hartford." The letters were slightly crooked, and glitter fell everywhere, but it was perfect. Her students insisted on hearing every detail from the White House. She shared the parts she could, keeping her voice warm and humble, emphasizing that the ceremony wasn't about her, but about all teachers. Some students beamed with pride. Others shyly asked if that meant their school would get more books. She promised she would do everything she could. In the afternoons, she returned home to Grace and Michael. Together, they prepared simple meals, talked about their days, and played music, while Grace danced in the living room with the unsteady enthusiasm of a toddler discovering her legs. In the evenings, Lena often found herself rocking Grace to sleep, humming softly, watching the rise and fall of her daughter's breathing. Sometimes in those quiet moments, memories from the past 2 years drifted into her mind. The old schools in Denver, the crowded hallways in Baltimore, the shy smiles of children who had finally received books of their own, the exhausted teachers who cried when the foundation delivered materials they had begged for. She thought of the principals who called her months later to say that their students were reading at higher levels than anyone predicted. And beneath all of it, there was one constant thread: a wedding day, a surprise guest, a single act that changed everything. Lena sat by the window one evening after Grace had finally fallen asleep. The sky outside turned deep blue, fading into night. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and let the stillness sink in. She remembered walking down the aisle toward Michael on their wedding day and seeing Keanu sitting silently in the back row. She remembered the envelope he handed her, the gift that led to Grace. She remembered the foundation's first meeting, the first school they helped, the first teacher who hugged her in gratitude. She remembered the moment she opened his final envelope on that garden bench, realizing the scope of what he had given not just her, but the entire country. She smiled to herself. Life had taken her down a road she never could have predicted, a road filled with challenges and joy and late nights and hopeful mornings, a road where the smallest choices had led to the greatest impact. She heard Michael's footsteps behind her, felt him gently rest his hands on her shoulders. Thinking again, he asked softly, "A little," she admitted, "about everything." She nodded, about how a single moment can change a life, maybe 1,000 lives. He kissed the top of her head. "Your life matters, Lena, and what you're doing matters even more." She leaned into him, letting the warmth of his words settle deep inside her. Because he was right. Her life did matter, and every day in ways small and large, she was proving it. Years passed gently, almost silently, the way seasons shift, without anyone noticing, until one day the air feels different. Lena often found herself thinking about how strange life could be, how unpredictable, how the moments that seem impossible to survive end up becoming the very moments that reshape everything. She learned this every day as she raised Grace. Grace grew from a quiet infant into a bright, curious child with warm brown eyes and an eagerness to understand the world around her. By the time she turned 6, she had developed a habit of asking deep questions at night and always right before bedtime, and always when Lena thought the day was finally slowing down. But before that question came, the one that would stay with Lena forever, there were years of discovering who she had become. One evening, long after the sun had set and the house had finally grown quiet, Lena sat by the living room window with a cup of tea. Outside, the neighborhood lights blinked softly. She listened to the hum of the dishwasher, the faint sound of Grace singing to herself upstairs, and the subtle rhythm of Michael preparing tomorrow's lunches in the kitchen. Ordinary sounds, familiar sounds, sounds of a life she once believed she would never have. She thought back to that wedding day, the afternoon breeze, the scent of garden roses, the way her heart had thudded painfully when she saw Keanu sitting in the back row, the shock of the envelope he placed in her hands, the first time she held Grace, the first school they visited, the first teacher who cried when the foundation delivered boxes of much-needed supplies. She traced each memory like chapters connected not by romance or heartbreak, but by something far deeper, purpose. She whispered that word to herself, now letting it settle in her chest. Purpose. It was the quiet force that had carried her after the divorce, the steady anchor that guided her through long nights of planning school grants. The foundation had become bigger than she ever imagined, bigger than anything she could have built alone. And she knew why. Because love does not disappear just because marriages end. Sometimes it changes shape, pulling itself into something wider, something sturdier, something capable of reaching people across cities and states. She spoke softly into the quiet room. Keanu couldn't give me the family we wanted back then, but he helped me build it now. The truth of that sentence wrapped around her like warmth. Not just because of Grace, though Grace was the heart of everything, but because of the thousands of students they had helped. The classrooms revived, the teachers finally supported, the lives redirected. She set her tea down carefully and let her eyes close for a moment. Because love doesn't always stay where it begins, she murmured. Sometimes it becomes something even more powerful. Purpose, legacy, second chances. She opened her eyes when she heard soft footsteps. Grace stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding her favorite stuffed bunny, her small face lit only by the hallway nightlight. "Mommy," she said, "can I ask you something?" Lena smiled gently. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" Grace walked closer, clutching her bunny. Her voice was curious, not worried, not scared, just thoughtful in that innocent, honest way only children can be. "Why do we help schools?" Mommy Lena felt the question land in her heart like a soft bell. She took a breath, ready to answer. Lena lifted Grace onto her lap, feeling the warmth of her small frame settle against her. The house was still the kind of stillness that makes every word feel heavier, more sacred. Grace looked up at her with wide, wondering eyes, waiting for an answer. Lena brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "We help schools," she said softly, "because someone showed up for me when I needed it most." Grace blinked. "Who?" "A friend," Lena whispered. "Someone who believed in helping others even when no one asked him to. Someone who reminded me that doing good doesn't have to be big or loud. It just has to be consistent. It just has to be real." Grace hugged her bunny closer. "Like you help your students." Lena smiled. "Exactly. And like you help people when you share your toys or when you make someone feel better when they're sad. Showing up matters. Even the small things matter." Grace thought about that for a long moment, then looked up again. "Did someone show up for you?" "Mommy?" Lena's breath hitched gently. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "Someone did." She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. The memories lived quietly inside her, not painful anymore, just meaningful. A reminder that life sometimes brings people back into our journey not to stay, but to redirect us toward the place we were meant to go. Lena kissed Grace's head, and now she whispered, "We show up for others. That's our family's mission." Grace rested her head on Lena's shoulder, satisfied with the answer, the kind of pure acceptance only a child could give. After a moment, she asked in a sleepy voice, "Will I help too when I get big?" "You already do," Lena whispered. "You're the reason I keep going." Grace's eyes grew heavy, her breathing slow and even. Lena carried her upstairs, tucked her into bed, and stood in the doorway watching her daughter drift into dreams. A new generation growing up not with wealth or fame, but with purpose stitched quietly into her life. Later, when Lena returned to the living room, she whispered a final thought into the stillness. "Thank you for showing up, whoever you are, wherever you are." The lights dimmed, the screen faded to black, and then the closing prompts appeared. Have you ever had someone show up for you when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments. What should Keanu do next? Suggest our next story below.